Then right then, I looked to my right, and there was like this little baby baboon, like little adolescent, quite small,
Yeah.
popped into my blind and looked at me and then screamed.
Welcome to the Wild Dispatch.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Wild Dispatch. I'm Robin and I'm back with more skills and stories from the wild. We have, as usual, another fantastic guest for you today. This one is a special one, I gotta say. We have Nathan Olsen, who is, I guess, famous for a number of reasons. The reason which maybe is most recent is his participation and success on the very latest season, that's season 12 of Alone, a show very close to my heart. The other thing that's also close to my heart, which I mentioned before in previous episodes, is the fact that this one is the first one to ever been held in South Africa, which feels like a second home to me. So I was absolutely stoked that Nathan got back to me and said that he'd be keen to jump on and have a chat about his experiences and his take on everything Alone. Not only, though, is he well known in survival circles because of his performance in this very latest show, he is also the son of Larry Dean Olsen, who is a legend in the survival world, has written a number of books on the matter, and has basically spent his whole life, we'll discover in this episode, learning how to survive in wild places and building those skills using very, very limited resources. We'll jump into that episode any second now, but first, a little bit of housekeeping. If you are new to the podcast, then welcome. If you could just hit the follow, subscribe, any of those buttons that connect you with this podcast on whatever provider you are listening on, then that would be fantastic. Another handy thing you can do is also set to auto downloads. That way, if you're out in the boonies and you need a bit of entertainment, you find yourself between adventures, maybe at this time of year you're waiting out a rainstorm, then you'll have the chance to listen to whatever episodes from this podcast has loaded up almost every week now. If you're a returning guest, then welcome back. It's lovely to have you here. If you could do all the things that people who are enjoying podcasts do, give us a good review. If you could write something, that always helps the algorithms. And then lastly, if you could send this podcast to someone you know who might enjoy the outdoorsy kind of content that we create, that goes a long way as well. Word of mouth is, as always, the most powerful thing out there. Right, I think that's everything that I was supposed to cover. Let's jump into the episode with Nathan. Okay, I think we are recording. Nathan, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Robin. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm delighted, man. I mean, I said it just a second ago. I'll say it again so that people can hear. It's taken us a little bit of back and forth to make this happen, but I'm so happy that it is happening. I guess, first of all, congratulations on Alone. I know that probably feels like a long time ago for you now, but it's relatively fresh in everybody's minds here, given the fact that I guess it was only maybe a month ago that the last episode came out of Alone, season 12. Is that right?
Something like that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. It has been, over a year and a half since we left the field there in South Africa. So
yeah. One question I've got then, based on that popped in my mind. How hard was it to keep that as a secret? If it's a year and a half and you've won this thing, yeah. And I guess the rule is you're not allowed to tell anyone, right? Maybe if you have a few people you trust, maybe that's allowed. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. So, of course, you're allowed to, tell immediate family. We have a lot of children, so that's a lot of people to encourage to be careful and keep it a secret, right? So
it must have been tricky keeping it stum, so to speak. There was one other thing I also wanted to ask you before we get rolling into all the different, there's so many things I want to ask you about. But we were going to have a chat actually before you were going off, I believe, into the mountains is my assumption. But I unfortunately had a bit of a sniffle. So I had to cancel, which was my fault. But you were going to go elk hunting. So I'm wondering, you're back now. How did that go?
Oh, it was a great trip. We went out for it's just the last 3 days of the season, the archery season here in Idaho, up in the Pioneer Mountains. Went with a friend, Del Janes. He's part of an outfitter company up there. Where, we didn't officially go with outfitters or guides, but we went into that region that he's really familiar with. And,
Perfect.
Man, we saw so many elk.
Yeah?
Del, my friend, we hunted together, and I think close to 100% of the elk we spotted, it was him spotting them first. That guy's got an incredible eye for it.
I guess you've got to get your eye tuned in certain areas, right? Like, I mean, I was just in the mountains of Colorado, and it took me, I was only there for 9 days, but definitely, I mean, we were coming across elk, which is always what you want, right? But it was definitely taking me longer to get my eye into that zone. For whatever reason, certain animals will pop in your vision. I think you've got to like train your eye, right? Like, and so like South Africa, when I was there hunting, and I've been lucky enough to hunt there quite a few times, it definitely takes a while. You don't see anything until it's running away at first. And then after a while, it clicks in. And it was definitely the same for elk hunting. So yeah, I don't blame you, man. Although I guess you've probably hunted elk for a while.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a long time experience for me, but Del certainly is a master of the craft there, and he did a good job of getting us in on some elk. We didn't time it with the rut. There was no bugling or any, noise going on that helped us locate any elk or call them in. But nevertheless, still got a lot of good action. I had one shot I almost took. It was about 40 yards, but I shoot a traditional bow, so it was just out of range, with that weapon. But I drew on it and realized, no, that's not a safe shot. And so, it was, for me, that was a very successful trip, just being able to get that close, see that many animals, cover so much country, be with an expert guide. Really good time.
Talk me through that, if you don't mind, talk me through that moment then, being full draw, 40 yards. What was the kind of terrain like? What was it a case of, you said they wasn't calling in, it was just stumbling across, right? So you were walk and stalk, that kind of situation, was it?
Yeah, exactly. So we had quite a bit of rain, and so we were able to see tracks, right? And so we could see where the elk had entered bedding areas, and they're in there. But you have to creep in so quietly, and they're all bedded, listening. It's really, really tough to approach elk in that condition, but we just went for it anyway. We didn't really have many other options. And so we were creeping around, and this one raghorn bull, stood up. I saw him stand up. He hadn't seen me yet. He'd heard me or smelled me. I'm not sure which. But his head was behind a tree and his butt was behind a tree. And his vitals were just right there in this little window. And I thought, oh, maybe even though it's out of range, I could take that shot because I'm going to stick a tree, right? Or I'm going to get him, I almost kind of broke my rule and took an extra long shot, but last minute decided, nah, I'm not going to do that.
Man, and what kind of stage was that in the hunt? Was that early on or was that later on? Because that can also be a factor, can't it?
Exactly. Yeah, that was last day. End of last day. So
yeah.
It
can also be, because I've been in situations like that where you're just near the end of the hunt and it's like, oh, I really want to fling an arrow so badly right now. But also I know how bad my experience of this whole hunt, or how much it could change, right? If you make that choice and it doesn't go the way you want, then you're like stressed with time, trying to find an animal that you've maybe not hit perfectly. Oof. Yeah.
No, I can honestly say that I've never regretted not taking the shot. I've only regretted shots I've taken that I shouldn't have. So I kind of keep that as a rule of thumb. Like,
that's
it doesn't feel right, just don't do it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good record to have. I sometimes don't take shots and then think about it, mull it over for many weeks. You're like, I think I imagine it being a better situation than it probably was for taking a shot. But Yeah, that was my season last, not this season, but the season before. I had a bullet 25 with a tree just covering its vitals, and
Oh man.
it was close. Some of my friends maybe gave me some trouble for not taking that shot because I had it videoed as well, but we'll see. Okay, so I'll stop waffling now. Let's get into it. I guess, what do we want to go into first? There's so many things I want to ask you about. I want to ask you about your experiences in South Africa. For one, it's a place super close to my heart, and I'd love to get your take on the whole experience, and we'll go into that. But I also really want to hear your story. I'm imagining everything is going to merge together, and we're going to jump back and forth and kind of hop all over the place with your memories of growing up and how the things that you learned both on your own in the wilderness, but also under your father, who Larry Dean Olsen, I believe is his name. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you keep the middle name? Is that right? Like, is that the proper way to say his name, or is it just Larry?
Yeah, no, he's often referred to as Larry Dean Olsen, as an author, just to really clarify, because, Larry Olsen's a fairly common name, I guess.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
In the the wilderness arena, a lot of people just call him Larry Dean.
Okay.
He often is referred to that way.
Well, that's good to know as well. Maybe we will, if I remember, I'll use that from now on. So maybe let's get a bit into, I think let's get into South Africa, because I'm just excited to hear another perspective on this episode. It was a really different episode for a lot of reasons. I mean, something that people have been talking about is the fact that it was a shorter season than previous.
Definitely.
Than many previous seasons, right? So I guess, why do you think that was?
Ooh, that's a great question. Yeah, and I think there's been a lot of people wondering that, and it was the shortest season, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, season 12, and the shortest by far. It's only 34 days. My expectation when I heard that we were going to be going to a desert environment, an arid environment, I suspected that the season would go extra long, because I thought, we're not going to be in a hole in the north, with almost total darkness by the end of the season, right? And having to wait that out in those conditions. I thought, well, we're going to have sunshine. It's going to help with your mental state. As long as we can find enough food, the season might go really, really long. And so it was a huge surprise to me when my son showed up at day 34. I did not expect that.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it was captured a bit on camera. I'm wondering if there was a mix of emotions then, if you were expecting this thing to go really long and you set yourself up, and we'll talk about the details of that, but it seemed like you set yourself up with a pretty good calorie situation. Suddenly it's like what you're seeing is the very beginning of this thing, and you're just finding a rhythm.
Yeah, there's definitely an element to that. Yeah, so there's some struggle there in the beginning, figuring it out, right? Learning the land, learning those fish especially. And I had just felt like, oh, I think I've got this. I think I can stay here a really long time, feeling really secure. And then, of course, it was over, which was a little bit of a letdown, but also super happy to win, of course.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I guess there's a goal, isn't there?
Yeah.
I want to make sure I phrase this correctly. Obviously, you go into this thing as a competition, and there's potentially you can win like a substantial prize. Given your history of doing so many of these kinds of experiences, did you also want to go in to kind of learn something about yourself, or was there also an aspect of that as well?
Yeah. So, I have spent a lot of time in the wilderness, but often with other people, right?
Yeah.
And even, maybe I've done 10 days alone previously, nothing extended like the alone experience. And really, that's something that's difficult to do in life, right? Who's going to block off that much time to go off by yourself, especially when you have a large family and work, there's just so many things that would prevent you from going and doing something like that, even if you really wanted to. Some people do. Some people pull it off. But for me, that was never a real option. And so the opportunity to be able to go on a competition like alone and have prize money as an incentive. You actually get paid while you're out there as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so it can facilitate like the opportunity to go and stay for an extended period of time. And I was looking forward to that. Like, what would that feel like to go deep, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that something which, I mean, me personally, I'm pretty extroverted as a person. So in my daydream of going on alone, as I'm sure many people have,
Sure.
I'm sure there's many other things that I would suffer through, but I know that that's definitely something I'm curious about as well, right? The experience of being alone, the nourishment that you get from interaction with other people. How did you kind of anticipate that being as an experience?
Yeah, well, you mentioned extroversion. I think personality is a huge factor. You know, some people are really fueled by interaction with others. It really does bring them a sense of mental well-being to be around people and to have that social exchange, right?
Yeah.
And then some of us that are quite introverted, you know, we kind of recharge by finding time alone. Like, that's important to us, right? So, you know, I've have a lifetime of kind of like taking off by myself just to get that recharge. As a matter of fact, thinking about times that I've been in the wilderness where I actually had this kind of lonely, depressed feeling or whatever, don't really know how to describe it. It's been when I've been with a group of people, actually. And I've been with them too much, because you know, sometimes you go on a wilderness expedition and you're with people 24 hours a day. You know, you're like hiking together, cooking together, and you're together until you go to bed. And then the first thing in the morning, you're right back together again. And so I've found myself historically just finding time to go for an hour hike by myself just to get recharged. And so for me, being on alone, my personality was suited to it. Like, I can honestly say I wasn't ever homesick out there. You know, again, I was only there 34 days. I don't know what would have happened if I stayed longer, but I was so busy too. Like, you know, there was work to do every day to figure out how to be able to stay there a long time. That kept my mind really occupied, just solving the problem of being there. So, yeah, for me, didn't have those feelings of missing.
Well, that's,
you know, of course, I miss my wife and kids. Like, yes, but not at a level that caused me to feel any, you know, sense of not feeling good, right?
Yeah, like a deep emotional level where it's actually extracting your energy, right? Definitely. Yeah, so I mean, I guess in that way, that's super interesting, and I guess makes sense why you're able to find a rhythm, not get distracted by those things so much. So then I'm curious, you're saying about the day-to-day work that you had to go through, and I mean, I think it's clear from the many conversations I've had with people who've been on the Alone Show, there is a lot of work, and obviously a lot, it's all captured, but it's not always represented, like the relentlessness of how much stuff you always have to be doing all the time. It's not, it's like you don't get a break. So what were the things then were your main focus early on and then continuing? I mean, the house, we'll talk about that at some point for sure.
Sure. Yeah. So absolutely the most important thing you're trying to figure out the whole time is the calorie equation. Like, how are you going to get those calories?
Yeah.
You obsess about that because it is the game, essentially. That is a core factor. And so trying to solve that problem, you know, takes some focus and experimentation and learning and, you know, iterations of effort. So, you know, you have a lot of different ways you could go with that, right? So prioritizing what you think is going to be most effective can be a real challenge.
So what did you think was going to be most effective first on? I'm assuming there's a lot of wild game running around all over the place. Was that something that you first of all thought, okay, this is where I'm going to put my effort?
Yeah, so the antelope species that were there were plentiful and enticing, right? You think, oh, wow, if I could get one of those, it'd be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
However, you know, as you know, they tend to be very lean. Just antelope in general have a really low fat content. And so the idea that you could kill one of those animals and live off of it for an extended period isn't very realistic. So in my mind, like, the antelope species were in addition to other food sources. And the main food source, of course, that had the capacity to provide the fat along with the protein were the fish. So I did spend most of my effort figuring out how to get those fish in my belly.
And you certainly did. So talk me through that a little bit then, because if I remember, it was a little while ago that I saw that episode, but early on, I think you were targeting maybe the smaller catfish, were you? Was it at that point then you figured, okay, maybe I can go for these big ones? Maybe that's a better approach?
Yeah, so we had heard that there were giant catfish, right?
Okay.
But, fishing stories, you're not really sure if, But, well, actually, one interesting story. I did kind of believe that there were large catfish in the Orange River. So we were in a reservoir of the Orange River. Okay. And in learning about South Africa, reading, I was consuming as much information as I could before going. Once we learned, that it was going to be in South Africa, I did read about these sharp-toothed catfish in the Orange River. And one story I read was that a lot of the local people were fearful of the fish for their little children. There were stories of like bathing a baby, just a mother down there like washing her baby off in the water, and a catfish just coming right up and taking that baby, big enough to just.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I thought, oh, wow. Yeah, they must be pretty large if they can do something like that. So, yeah, that was always on the mind. Like, wow, if you could land one of those, that would be really cool. Of course, we just went in with 30-pound test line, right? So at first, the first fish I caught was a smallmouth yellowfish.
Okay.
And I used the head of that fish and quickly caught a larger catfish, a mid-sized catfish. And that happened pretty quickly. So I was feeling super confident right there at the beginning. And then I tried to use part of the catfish head to catch more, but it just did not work. It stopped working. And I was really confused by that. Later, I came to the belief that the catfish wasn't that attracted to its own scent. Like that yellowfish head had just brought him in quickly, but the catfish head wasn't really enticing, And I also figured out that those catfish like fresh meat, fresh bait. They, any bait that I never ever caught anything on day old bait. It really? Always was fresh every time I was successful. And it took me a minute to figure that out too, right? But, I keep trying with the same piece of bait that I was using yesterday, and that was wasting time completely. We had a 2-pole limit, right? We could only have 2 lines in at a time. They need to be in range to where you could monitor them, Mm-hmm. You couldn't like set lines and leave them out overnight. So that was an additional challenge, right? So you're limited on the number of hooks you can have in the water, and then you've got to be paying attention to those as well. So
that's interesting. I didn't actually realize that. I think I assumed that you were leaving them, and maybe it might have been a detail that they covered in the show, or maybe they just didn't cover that information. But that makes it way harder, because I thought, oh, perfect situation. If you can just load up a couple of lines in the water all the time, 24/7, then in my mind, I thought, oh, you're off like dancing a jig somewhere else, doing other stuff the whole time. But actually, you do need to be kind of within earshot or eye line to see if something's going on.
Yeah, the kind of our rule was you had to be in eyesight. So like when I was building my shelter, I always had 2 lines out, but I could see those lines from where I was working, make sure they're monitored. Yeah.
Let's talk about water, because I think it's an important thing, obviously. I remember speaking with Doug North before, and he said that it was it was even more of a procedure than he thought it would be. So did that take up a huge amount of time as well then? I mean, how much water were you drinking every day?
Yeah, I was drinking, 4 liters plus every day.
Wow.
I'm drinking a lot of bad water in my life, or I've had to boil a lot of bad water and process a lot of water that did not look pleasant. So that, for me, was just business as usual, processing the water there. And luckily, I had plenty of firewood, lots of fuel. Ferro rods is really easy to just start a fire and get the water boiling. And you could, of course, do other things. You could fish, while your water's boiling. So you just can weave it into a flow. And then every time I had a meal, which is a significant amount of the time, there are a lot of days where I was eating 3 meals a day. I had a 2-quart pot. I was either boiling fresh fish or dried fish, and I would make sure that pot was clear full of water every time. I had salt. I had plenty of salt to it. So that fishy broth in every meal, that was a significant source of fluids forming, just incorporated right into the regular cooking. So that helped a lot.
I guess that's a factor which isn't actually that common with other, what's the word, participants. Yeah, I guess if you don't have nearly as many calories coming in, and that's not also in the process of having a lot of water, it's not a usual situation where, like you had, where you were literally consuming a bunch.
Just as, to be clear on that, when I had food, I ate 3 meals a day.
Yeah.
So I'd have a 2-quart pot of liquid with fish in it for breakfast, 2-quart pot for lunch, 2-quart pot for dinner. And so I got my water consumption just while cooking food.
Yeah. So you could just focus on other things as you're waiting for fish to land. We've talked a lot about South Africa already, but we haven't actually set up what it's like in case people haven't watched the show, of which case they should, because this is it's a good season. How would you describe South Africa and the environment that you were in?
Sure. I don't know if this podcast includes video or not there's the option, but behind me,
it will. I think it will.
Yeah, behind me is southern Idaho desert. We're just at the edge of what's called the Great Basin, and the terrain here looks very similar to the terrain we were in South Africa. Like if you were to stand on a hill and look around in South Africa, you might think you were in certain parts of the Great Basin. Of course, when you get closer to the plants and animals, you're like, they are different species for sure. But for me, having spent so much time in this part of the world, it felt very comfortable being there. I mean, we've got rattlesnakes and scorpions and, plenty of similar things that sometimes people aren't used to, right? So I felt very comfortable living on the ground there in South Africa. And certainly, though, a thing that was dramatically different was the abundance of big game. It was just unbelievable. Yeah.
Did you have any encounters then? I'm guessing if you decided that you were going to focus on fish because of the fatty content and that being better for you, I'm guessing what you're talking about, and it's weird, I've never thought about this with African game, but they are pretty lean. I mean, occasionally you'll get an outlier that's really fatty, and that's always a good time. Sure. But so it's a little bit like, what's the term? Rabbit starvation? Is that the term where it's like if you could be eating calories, you could be eating protein, but if there isn't enough fat, you're actually not getting everything you need, right?
A good point there is that being in season 12, lots of previous contestants in Alone have tried to live on a high protein diet and just lost weight rapidly. Yeah. And so all of us had the advantage of having watched all those previous seasons and heard the commentary from, the participants, and knew that you've got to have some fat in your diet in addition to that protein, or it's not going to work out long term.
I guess many other people would have been prepping and thinking about going to another sort of semi-polar environment, if that makes sense. Northern, getting very cold, lots of ice, super different landscape. I wonder, I'm curious, I haven't done this as research, maybe I should, but how many other people were familiar with that kind of terrain? It's definitely an advantage.
Yeah, I felt like it was for me. I felt like I drew a lucky straw going to that location. It felt a little bit like a home court game. Yeah. Just the level of familiarity. And, that kind of stuff accumulates over a lifetime. I would have definitely been at a disadvantage in a boreal forest, right? Haven't spent much time living in that environment. And you can't really make up for that. You can take courses, you can do research, but time on the ground in the environment that you're trying to survive in is really important.
That familiarity and that comfort. Okay, so I want to ask you about soap, because I looked at your 10 items before we jumped into this chat. And that one seemed, I guess I can imagine where you'd come from with that. But if there's only 10 items, soap isn't usually high up on many people's lists for what they're gonna choose. What were you thinking with that?
I thoroughly enjoyed having it. The climate was such there that I could take a bath almost any day. There was a little stretch when it cooled off and we got a lot of rain. But other than that, I took a daily bath and soaped up. I was able to wash my hands before every meal. I can clean my pot. Let's say you wanted to boil some water in your pot, but it's full of a fishy taste. And so, if that's your only source of processing water, then every bit of water that you ever drink is going to taste like fish. And just having a little bit of soap, just that simple pleasure of being able to drink water that doesn't taste like fish now and then is kind of nice, right? I actually really love the fish broth, but a hint of fish isn't as good as like straight up fish broth, right? And you're drinking water.
Oh, yeah.
So that's one thing maybe a lot of people don't think about when it comes to soap, but certainly from a sanitation standpoint and just feeling good. I did my laundry, stayed clean, hygienic, with my hands. And yeah, so I thoroughly enjoyed having it out there. It's something that I always take. I'm out hunting. After you process an animal, it's so nice to just be able to wash with soap when you're done.
Yeah. I always have it too, if I'm honest. Like I'm asking that question, but I think I definitely relate. It's just something I find if you're out in the mountains for a long time. I say long, it's all relative, right? But it's certainly after a few days, like everything's sticky and uncomfortable. So I think it can really be good for morale, right? Like you get in a river or whatever water that you can, have a wash off, and then suddenly it's a bit of a reset. Yeah, it's good. So I'm asking you the question about soap, but some of the ways in which you were trained beforehand and grew up, you had far fewer items than 10. Is that right? Could you talk a little bit about that? I think it was usually, is it just a blanket and a knife that you would take out into the wilderness?
Yeah, the standard kit, it's a blanket, a knife, a wool blanket, a knife, and a peach can. So just a can of peaches that you eat the first day, but then you use that can to cook in and boil water in. And it's kind of a mid-size can. And then, of course, depending on the type of course my father was teaching, if it was more of a hardcore course for adults that really wanted to challenge themselves, then you would go out into the wilderness with very little food supply. I worked a lot of years in wilderness therapy, where, of course, you're taking a significant food supply with you. But, the Anasazi Foundation in Arizona, for many, many years, the gear was just that, a blanket, a cooking can, a knife, a food pack, right? And then, of course, your clothing. Over the years, that's changed a little bit. Certainly sleeping bags in the colder seasons. There are fire closures, that prevent you from sleeping near a fire to stay warm with a wool blanket. And so it's not real practical to use a wool blanket in a lot of the settings. But the original courses, that was kind of the core kit. And so I've slept many, many nights on the ground with a blanket, learned a lot of techniques for staying warm. And so I felt like that was an advantage as well. Like a lucky thing this year is, we weren't allowed to take sleeping bags. We could take a wool blanket, something that I'm already familiar with and didn't have to figure out, right? There's a way you can fold a wool blanket to sleep in it that's much, much warmer than just getting in and folding it over yourself. Learned it from book Moores Johansky, right? The ultimate northern bushcraft guy, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the greatest things I ever saw in his book was how to fold that blanket. And, I learned that many years ago, and my father never taught me that. Like, I had been just rolling up in them and doing all kinds of other things. But laying corner to corner on the blanket, folding the bottom up over your legs, and then bringing each side around and wrapping it around you, you end up with multiple layers of blanket. And, 2 layers isn't twice as good as one. It's better than twice as good because it traps air in between the layers, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, it makes a huge difference. So I slept really comfortable and warm out there, having, again, had a lot of experience. Well, I've been cold in a blanket many, many times. So
I wonder.
Trial and error.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good nugget to hear, which makes me want to, do a bit more research, actually. I need to read those books. This is a bit of a quick side note, but Dave Holder is one of the producers on Alone, and I'm sure you spent a bit of time with him whilst you were over there. Did you guys talk about Moores and having read the books? Because I don't know if you're familiar, but I actually interviewed Dave Holder a while ago, and he got to spend quite a long time learning directly from Moores.
Yeah, I was familiar with the fact that he had, and so I was a little bit starstruck, honestly, being able to go spend that 10 days during orientation camp with Dave Holder. I mean, he was there to teach us, right, and prepare us. An amazing experience. I love that guy. Very, very knowledgeable. And his connection to Moors made that, even more fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone I've ever talked to always says the same thing. Like, love that guy.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay. So you are actually the second of your family to go on the Alone show. Did your brother have any tips for you? Did you talk with him before you went over and had the experience yourself?
Oh, yeah. We talked for hours and hours, of course. And he had plenty of advice for me. So that was really, really helpful. I talked to other contestants that had been out on Alone as well, and listened to a lot of podcasts from other contestants, and learned about their experience. Because there's so much more that happens out there than what you see, obviously, right? There's just not enough time in the editing to really tell the full story. So, Luke, my younger brother, a few years ago, I was dating my current wife, Erica, and we were sitting on the couch and watching Alone. We binge watched it together when we first met. And, it was actually sitting there on the couch with her watching the show and then talking about it that connected us. We had a lot of really great conversations as a result of processing what we were seeing watching Alone together. And I think that kind of accelerated our relationship and learning, that we had shared values and so on. But anyway, we're sitting there on the couch. My brother Luke comes to visit. He sat down and watched, I think we might have been watching season 6, my favorites. And Erica and I, of course, had talked about the potential of me going on Alone. And she's like, well, we're just getting together and, might be blending a family. Could you wait a couple of years at least so we can kind of get through this process? I was like, yeah, of course. But Luke, he showed up and I was like, Luke, you should apply. You should try and go on this show. And so Luke sent in a letter or an email, right, for casting the next time it came up. And I think he mentioned Larry Olsen, right? Larry Dean Olsen in his message, and somebody on the casting crew recognized that name. And that's, because tens of thousands of people, right, apply every year. And I think that's what helps him get, noticed and ended up being cast. So, one of the, when you mentioned the advice from Luke, I think one of the things that I would say gave me the most courage to just go and do it and feel like I could succeed at it was his explanation of just how great he felt the whole time he was out there. He's like, Nathan, this is what we've been doing our whole lives. This is natural for you. You're going to go out there and you're going to feel good. And you're going to be successful. He just had that confidence that it was something that he knew I could do and do it well. And that confidence, certainly played a big role. So I'd say that's the number one piece of advice is from him is just this is natural for you. You can do it. We've got this.
Well, that's nice to be in that situation where that is the best advice, right? You've already spent your whole life preparing for this, not even necessarily preparing for this experience, right? It's just you happen to have an adjacent kind of track in your life to what is celebrated in this show. So I had a question in my mind just a second ago and it's now escaped me. Yes, that was it. So Luke mentioned that you're going to go off and have this experience in the wild and you're going to feel great. I feel like that ties quite nicely into the concept of wilderness therapy and the therapizing, if that's the word. You can correct me on this, being far more of an expert than I am, but the benefits that come from being out in the wild. And that's something which your father really was a big proponent of. Is that correct?
Sure, yeah. It was his life's work.
Was that something that happened early on, the kind of process? Because I know your father was holding these kinds of training experiences, wilderness skills for a very long time. Yeah. But it didn't always start that way, did it? It was more about the skills than the emotional or mental benefits.
Well, yeah, it was a natural evolution. So, my father grew up right here in southern Idaho.
Yeah.
He hiked these canyons as a boy, was fascinated with the relics, of the people who had lived here before. They left their trace all over this place, right? And so super, super curious about the peoples here of, the Great Basin region. And started to practice the skills that, he went to museums, saw artifacts, tried to replicate the tools they were making. He learned to flint knap, he learned to make cordage, he learned to, make fish spears and traps, and, just everything he saw in a museum or out in the wild, he tried to replicate. And he was so enthused about it as a young boy, it took him extra years to graduate from school because he was so engrossed in, these wilderness skills, obsessed with it, really. Well, he ended up, getting married, going to college, and at college down at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, he had a job flipping hamburgers at the cafeteria, the school cafeteria. And they'd had some children, and they were just living this very poor student life, right? And he had this idea that, hey, I know a lot of these skills, and he, people who had met him and talked to about it seemed really curious. Like a lot of people just wanted to learn as well. And so he taught some Boy Scout troops, and it was really well received. And then he decided to approach the university because they were talking about having community education courses, right? Not for credit courses. And so he proposed that he teach a class on outdoor survival skills for one of those educational or community ed programs. The university said, yeah, sure. If you can get 30 students, then, you can have a course and we'll pay you so much per month, right? This is back in the 60s. It wasn't very much, but yeah, compared to flipping hamburgers, it felt like a good opportunity to provide for his family. So the first night of put up posters around campus. The first night, over 60 people showed up. So they broke it into 2 sections, doubled his income, and the course was a hit. People loved it, and it filled up the next semester. And then they made it into a 4-credit course that he taught for the university. And he never actually graduated because he was so involved in teaching this course at Brigham Young University that never finished college. So, but one of the things that they noticed, they were taking all these, college-age students. Of course, they had classroom work, but then at some point in the semester, at the end, they would go out and do a field trip, right? And they were having really great experiences. And then they decided to do an extended field trip in the summer, like a 27-day survival course. And they've been getting reports from students after having this wilderness experience that it really affected them. Man, I just feel like I'm motivated to do better in school and life. I feel recharged. And they were seeing this psychological benefit of spending time in the wilderness. And so the psychology department decided to run a little experiment on, to see if spending time in the wilderness could help with academic success. And so they wrote a letter to all the students who had been let go from the university the previous year they basically failed, flunked out of school, right? And so they sent them a letter and said, hey, if you'll come back and do this 27-day course this summer, we'll give you a chance to re-enroll in the fall. And they had quite a few takers, close to 30, I think. So they bussed them down to southern Utah, sent them out in the wilderness for 27 days. And it turned out that only one of the students in that entire group didn't graduate. And so they thought, wow, that's just an amazing success. We took this cohort that flunked out, gave them this experience, let them re-enroll, and now we have this really outstanding graduation rate. So that's what kind of kicked off the idea that, hey, this is really powerful, taking people out in the wilderness. And so then they started working with some adjudicated youth. Rather than sending them to juvenile detention, they were sending them out on these little wilderness treks as an intervention, right? And that's what really caught on back in the 60s. And from that has emerged a whole field of what's called wilderness therapy. So from that point forward, the majority of my father's life was spent taking young people out into the wilderness as It's a way to intervene in their lives in a positive way.
Yeah, that's incredible as well. Like a wonderful series of discoveries too.
Yeah.
So these principles, I know they made such a difference to people who were maybe having some problems in their lives. But then I think your father also put those principles to all his children, right? Is that true? Like, I think you guys often went through these experiences too, right? So I remember listening to a podcast where you talked about some of your early memories of being taken out into the wilderness with your father for the first time. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So, my parents had 10 children, and like any large family, you will often recruit your kids in the family business. They're your helpers,
Yeah.
they're labor, right? So we ran big gardens and stuff at home, but we weren't farmers. Instead, my father's career was out in the wilderness. And because he had that as a career, he could take us to work with him, and he did. So we were constantly going out to the field with him. There's entire summers where our whole family lived in the field in a teepee, kind of like in a central location where the wilderness groups were operating. So we had just a lot of dirt time out there, just as children playing, tagging along. And as we got older, of course, we got put to use, carrying in resupply food. And, there's a group we think is lost, let's all go look for them. And so we just got used all the time. And as a result, spent a lot of time out sleeping on the ground and living out there. So it was just a natural part of growing up in our household.
You also, I believe, opted to be homeschooled, and that had quite an interesting structure in itself, right? Which I imagine involved a lot of dirt time too.
Yeah, so, we would spend the summers typically out in the field, come back for the school year. My mom often made our clothes during the summer, right? And then come back and send us all to school. But in the 5th grade, I was looking out the window one time and just really did not want to be in school. Wanted to be alone. Again, I'm very introverted, and all that social time every day it just would wear me out to go to school. It really did.
Yeah.
And somewhere I heard this word homeschool, and it took me a minute to kind of process what that might even mean. And I asked my parents about it, and they're like, oh yeah, homeschooling, it's a thing. We've heard of some families down in Utah doing it, and I said, well, I want to do it, and proposed it to them. And they said, well, we're pretty busy. We got a lot going on. We don't really have time. How do you, to be a good teacher? And I said, oh, don't worry, I'll read. I made a plan, right? And proposed it. And they said, okay, we'll give this a shot. And so my very first assignment my dad gave me was go for a hike, find an arrowhead. And the hike was just right back here, by the way. Find an arrowhead, don't pick it up, draw a picture of it where it is, leave it there, but write a story about how you think it got there. That was my very first homeschool assignment. And so it just went on from there. That's what homeschool was like. That and some math workbooks and, a few things. But one of the things that enabled me to do is herd sheep. I was fascinated with sheep herding. And so I had saved some money, and my parents matched, and we bought a flock of sheep, about a dozen ewes and a ram.
Okay.
And I actually graze them every day up this canyon. This is Salmon Falls Creek, and it just goes for miles and miles up here. And so I would get up in the morning with my backpack, take off with the sheep, read books, just hang out alone, all day long, and then bring them home in the evening and put them in a corral that had a light in it so that the coyotes wouldn't come in. And, you can't just leave a sheep out here. The coyotes around here will take them.
Okay.
So that was, that had to happen every day. Eventually I got to where I'd turn them out, and then go find them later. But a lot of time.
So there's one other story that I'd love you to tell, if you wouldn't mind. I think your dad took you out, just the two of you. I mean, obviously it's a big family. You got a lot of siblings. I think that was a bit of I don't know if tradition is the right word, but it's something that each of your siblings kind of, as they got to the right age, they would go through spending some time out in nature with your dad. Would you mind sharing that story?
Yeah, sure. So when I was 4, We actually lived on a ranch in Montana. And
Okay.
my dad, he had a really bad car accident that broke his femur. It was a really bad break. His leg never healed properly. And so that limited his ability to go on like extended hikes and to do the type of survival courses, at least during the time that he was recovering for a few years from that accident. And so my parents moved to Montana, bought a small ranch there. His book was selling at that time, and it was a national bestseller, and he was making quite a bit of money, just, income from the book sales, to where they were able to buy this ranch in Montana. And the idea was to teach homesteading there on the ranch. So he had students that would come and learn, all kinds of homesteading and bushcraft skills. And anyway, so we were living there, and but one day my dad, said, "Hey, we're gonna go out together, just you and me." And again, a lot of siblings, and so that felt really special, just to have a night with my dad. And he just, we didn't take a blanket, we didn't take anything other than a knife.
Wow.
And as we were hiking, he stopped and he cut a willow. And as we were hiking, he carved a toy knife for me out of that willow with like a decorated handle. It was just this beautiful little toy knife. And so, he had his knife, I had mine. We hiked up into the hills. We found a spot by a big rock. And he said, "We're going to spend the night right here." And by the way, along the way, he was gathering all kinds of edible plants and feeding them to me, or eating a lot of it raw as we went, and kept some stuff that we ended up roasting later. But he said, "Okay, we're going to sleep right here. Let's gather grass." So we went and gathered grass to make a bed. And then between the grass and where the fire was going to be, and we put some rock to kind of protect us from the fire. And then he put up a reflection stone next to the fire. And then we gathered wood, and he stacked all the wood where his head, above our head. And we got a fire going. We hung out together. And then when it was time to go to sleep, we just laid on our side in front of that fire, and I had my back to him and the fire in front of me. And this is Montana, Bitterroot Mountains. Like, it's cold at night, even in the summer, quite chilly.
Yeah.
But I fell asleep and did not wake up till morning. Like, I stayed completely warm with no bedding all night long, because every time that fire started to die down, my dad would just reach up above his head and put sticks on, put wood on the fire. So we just kept that steady fire, and then with him behind me, and I had my head was on his arm for a pillow. So just as a little 4-year boy, I had a perfectly comfortable night. And that's the kind of dad he was. Like, he just took me out there and gave me that experience. And when the first day I was on alone, I replicated that exact same setup.
Okay.
First thing I did when I got there was gathered grass, set up my fireplace, made a comfortable bed, gathered firewood, stacked it by my head. And then, of course, I had a blanket, which was great. But I did the same thing at night. Anytime it get chilly, I just dragged some wood off, and put it on the fire without having to get out of bed. And so, yeah, I had memories of my father in that experience there, that first day on alone.
That must have been amazing. Yeah, I was actually just about to ask you, and you've already answered it, but yeah, the nature of doing this experience and being on your own, and there not being any distractions of talking with other people. You must have had a lot of strong memories come back. I wonder if there's any other stories or things that triggered in your mind, like you had time to think about, because there's nothing else to stop you other than the routine of being there alone.
Yeah, I would say for the first few weeks, I would have memories like that, and I would think, what would Dad do in this situation, and kind of to be more objective. I would try and put myself in his shoes and take a step back and look at the situation and try and solve. And then remembering, of course, lots of life events that, provided information that I was able to use to succeed out there. But I was very busy, so there wasn't a lot of time, digging into memories. But I would say, the last 10 days that I was there, and I was feeling really confident in the food supply. I was kind of relaxing into it a little bit more. I decided to start having, picking a person, one of my children, every day. And for that entire day, as I was working on my shelter, whatever I was doing, I would go try and remember when they were born. Like, what was that like? What can I remember about them? And I would take it from that point forward, just trying to think of everything I could, like just trying to open up those old cobwebby folders in my brain, right?
Yeah.
And it was amazing to me to do that practice and be able to find some really fun memories. And that really did, I think, help me feel super connected to my kids while I was out there, being able to spend that time doing that. And it was, I think, a really great practice, psychologically for being on that side. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, anything you can do to help your mental, what's it called? The monkey mind is an expression, right? Like to keep it occupied on something keeps you happy. That must have been, really powerful. I'm curious then, you had this moment with your father, and then you're thinking of your kids as you're going about your time alone. Did you replicate what your father taking you out and having these moments when you were 4 years old? Did you carry on the tradition? Is that something you've done with your children as they've gotten older?
Certainly, I've made some efforts. I have not done as good a job as my parents. They were much, much better parents than I ever dreamed of being.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah. But no, I did. I've always appreciated, those opportunities that our parents gave us growing up,
Yeah.
Like they let us struggle. They didn't fix everything for us, they trusted us to go on adventures, and there's just so many examples of, siblings of mine, like going on extended adventures at pretty young ages. Because the parents just had this kind of confidence that we would be okay and we could do it,
Yeah.
A lot of encouragement, I guess is the word I would use. And so, I've tried to be the same, like open-minded to requests that children make, take them seriously. Like I really appreciated my parents saying, hey, yes, you can do homeschool. Grade 5, they let me have that experience. They let me go be a sheep herder. And those are just a couple of examples, but it was a pattern for all of their children. And so I've tried as a parent, but it's really hard not to rescue your children from struggle. Like you see them going through a struggle, and your first impulse as a parent, because you love them so much, is to intervene and fix the problem for them, right? Yeah. And the more we do that, we lessen our children's ability to solve problems for themselves in the future and to feel that sense that they can handle things that come their way. So I've made an effort to encourage, but not to fix, to say to a child like, hey, I know this is really hard, what you're going through right now, but I also know you can do it. I know you, and you've got this, right?
Yeah.
So encouraging them rather than just saying, oh, you spent too much money on your credit card? Yeah, I'll help bail you out. No.
Yeah.
1,000 examples that apply. But again, I haven't done a very great job of that compared to my parents, but it's something that they practice that I really appreciated.
So I'm imagining then as well, obviously it's lessons which were passed down from your parents to you, but you were also quite involved with the Anasazi, am I saying that correctly? The Anasazi Foundation. So I'm assuming also through the whole process of being involved in that and going on many of those courses that you would have been passing that kind of sentiment through to people who are struggling too, right? So I can imagine that's, definitely just a big part of who you are if you're involved in that course for so long. How long were you doing that for?
Quite a few years. So as a teenager, of course, just helping out. But then as a young adult, worked quite a few years in the field, taking groups of young people out with the Anasazi Foundation. And that model, also, there's a lot of encouragement that goes on there too, right? You're going out into the wilderness, and it's a real sense of camaraderie between like the guides and the clients. You're out there in it together. You have exactly the same gear, the same food. You all need to prepare for the night, stay warm, to eat well, to get to the next destination. You go out there, and as a guide, you just live. You make a grass bed so you can sleep comfortable, and the clients, the the students, they watch you build that grass bed. And then they ask you questions like, how do I do this or that? And you get the opportunity to just invite and teach and encourage. And it's really an amazing experience to see, a young person after spending time out there, they've reached they're proficient enough that they could go spend a significant amount of time on their own in their wilderness if they wanted to. And that's pretty empowering to just know that you can do that, right? So it's a unique thing actually in the world today, that skill.
I can definitely, it's not exactly the same, but I can definitely feel, having spent the last 5, 6, 7 years becoming more connected with the wild and learning, not nearly to the extent that you or your family, obviously, but growing more comfortable with the wilderness, learning skills, learning how to feed myself through hunting and foraging and understanding mushrooms and plants, that there's something deep inside that creates like a sense of well-being, but also a confidence that if you have that understanding, that maybe it's a primal thing that comes way back to generationally,
sure,
when we really had no choice. There were no other options than just the skills that you had to keep you alive. But it comes with, I think that brings a sense of well-being. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, that truly is what wilderness therapy is. And the data, shows that experience truly does have a profound effect on people's lives. And so I've been lucky to be a part of a lot of research around wilderness therapy through my career and other forms of behavioral healthcare treatment. Wilderness therapy really stands out in that, if you give a student an assessment at the beginning, that measures their levels of distress in life, anxiety, depression, whatever it is, their relationships. So you score all that at the beginning, score it at the end, score it a year later. The level of improvement in those scores is dramatic. And this has been replicated thousands of times, with literally tens of thousands of clients over a long period of time. There's been over 100 published studies on the data that's been gathered from these wilderness therapy programs. And it's absolutely clear that it's, the outcomes are very significant. If you think about it, if you were a therapist trying to work with someone who was struggling with anxiety or depression, and they came to your office and met with you, in that environment, and as a therapist that if they would go home and they would exercise and eat well, and they wouldn't spend all their time in front of a screen. And, if you knew as a clinician, if you could get them to do that for the rest of the week, that your outcomes and your working with that client would be much better. And so it's pretty simple, right? You go out in the wilderness and you get that built-in exercise, good diet, away from the distractions of the digital world, especially now. And then you're with people that are there, that are helpful, that are trained, right, that understand and can empathize with anxiety and depression and other struggles, right? So you've got all this support, and then you've got a setting that just reinforces that. And therefore, the outcomes are amazing. So,
yeah. I'm curious. You actually, I read a paper about wilderness therapy, and there's so much. Absolutely. To double down on what you're saying, it's incredible the amount of positive results in terms of, many, many, many factors. There's one factor I was curious about, that there was an element of percentages that it's actually safer to be out in a wilderness therapy course in the wild than a lot of these kids who are going through various experiences, suffering in multiple different ways. That you're actually safer when you're out in the wilderness. And I guess it's a two-part question. One is, could you talk a bit about maybe why that is? But then also, the thing that I was curious about is, has there been a point where maybe there's been a misperception about wilderness therapy? And was there a need to look at those statistics? I'm wondering, I was looking at the statistics, but also looking at why does it need to even be talked about? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, Robin. Yeah, so wilderness therapy, as I mentioned, has a long history. Kind of started in the 60s with my father. There was some stuff going on with Outward Bound back then, right? When they're realizing the benefit of, taking young people out on expeditions. And over time, that has turned into a business model, right? A wilderness therapy program is a business that takes young people out into the wilderness and provides treatment. And like any business, there are various business owners, and they may choose to do things in different ways, right? And so there was an era where there was an element, I would say, of tough love kind of mentality, which is not at all the model. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of camaraderie between the staff and students in the model that my father, taught. Yeah. But, other people, for example, had like a life-changing experience going to boot camp, right? Oh, that changed my life. It was amazing. Yeah, and so then, let's do a wilderness program and let's shake these kids up, let's yell at them and tell them they're babies and whatever they do, right? Yeah. Which was totally inappropriate for the setting, because especially if you're taking out young people who've had like trauma in their life, the last thing they need is another traumatic experience. They don't need somebody yelling at them or not feeding them well or. So there was an element for a time when some programs started up that, my father saw that happening and it really upset him. As a matter of fact, when he started the Anasazi Foundation and created it as made it into a nonprofit, part of that effort was to show a blueprint for how this can be done in a way that's, trauma informed, that takes good care of people, where they're safe, not just physically, but emotionally safe in the program. Well, there were several programs that came and went. There were some issues, with death and a couple of them that happened, and some things that should not have happened. And so that did create this negative image in the press and the media of these so-called wilderness therapy programs, right? Where kids actually got hurt. Yeah. And so my father.
How long ago was that? Just I'm curious.
A lot of that happened in the 90s.
Okay.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, not too long ago, there was a documentary on Netflix called Hell Camp. Yes. And it was about one of those programs in the 90s, late 80s, or maybe into the early 90s.
Okay.
And it truly did go wrong after a while. And the participants in those programs that are upset about it now as adults, they're well justified in being upset about some of the treatment that occurred. So one of the things my father was always involved with was trying to raise the bar and make sure that kind of stuff never happened again. There's an organization called the Outdoor Behavioral Health Care Council, and their job, they organize themselves to create standards, code of ethics and code of operations to where, that kind of stuff would never happen again. And that's where a lot of this research comes from, right? Constantly trying to improve themselves, improve outcomes, learn over time. And you mentioned it, within OBH, the OBH programs, over an extended period of time, they collected data, and they collected data on injuries, so like physical safety, and how often does a student in the field get injured to where you have to remove them from the field for treatment, like take them to an emergency room to get stitches or whatever, right? Yeah. Counted all that very carefully. They also tracked fatalities, of course, right? And as a result, the last data set that we just looked at and recently published, there were over 36,000 clients that participated in this study, and that involved more than 2.2 million client days in the wilderness.
Wow.
So a lot of time on the ground.
Yeah.
And this is for a population typically, age 15 to 24, young people. And so they took that information and compared it to the general population. So if you're age 15 to 24 in the general population, what's the likelihood that you're going to get injured and need to go to the emergency room? How frequent is that? And what's the fatality rate for young people in America in that age group? And then they compared that to those same rates, right, in wilderness. And it turns out that in a wilderness program, you're 6.5 times less likely to die than you are in regular life. Yeah. So, it's an outstanding result. And really flip that narrative. Like that hell camp narrative was, oh, it's super dangerous. But the reality is that these OBH programs that are following best practices, it's actually a much safer place to be as a young person than in our modern world. And the thing that's actually really extraordinary about that is that most of the participants in wilderness therapy are there because they're struggling in some way, whether that's anxiety or depression or, some other issue going on in their life. And that population is even more likely to experience fatalities in regular life than the general population. So, I think it's even better than 6.5 times better for the young people that have participated in wilderness therapy.
Yeah. I don't think
and then when it comes to injuries, again, it's very similar rates. Like the emergency room rate for, young people being pulled out of the wilderness to those in regular life is almost identical. So, and which is also amazing because out there you're using knives, you're whittling all the time, you're going to get cuts, things are going to happen, right? And so it's pretty impressive that it's that safe.
Definitely. And also I can imagine, ultimately the parents are probably going to be a main factor, right? And it's easy to have a misperception about the wild, danger, animal encounters or snakes or whatever happens to be in the environment that you're in. Yeah. There's always a bit of a disproportionate fear of those dangers versus like the drive to get to somewhere is usually far more dangerous, isn't it? So I can see how statistics like that would really help put people's minds at ease if they're looking for some help, right?
Absolutely.
So is it okay if we jump back to alone?
Sure.
We'll probably jump around. We can jump back and forth. If there's something else that you think of that you wanted to say about what we were just talking about, then by all means, just shout. I wanted to talk about the giant stone house that you built. Now, I'm like many other people who watch Alone, I'm sure, a bit of an armchair expert. I remember thinking, like, what is this guy doing? Like, he's pouring so many calories into building this shelter.
Yeah.
And I was curious. As you were doing it, and I think they weren't showing some of the context maybe of the story in the sense that you were starting to figure out an effective food and consistent food source. But could you talk me through that? Like, when did you think that you were going to start building a stone house? Did you have the plan to do that before? Did you wait until you'd got a bit more of a secure food source before you started? Talk me through your thinking with that, because it's kind of risky behavior.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely it is. And it was a huge calorie expenditure. That was a lot of rock and sand that I moved to build that shelter. Yeah. So as I mentioned, when I got there, I just made a grass bed.
Yes.
No shelter at all. I did not take a tarp as one of my 10 items. I was not expecting it to rain ever.
Yeah.
Because, I had looked up the rainfall records for the previous several years in that exact location. Uh-huh. And, it wasn't going to rain. Of course. Boy, did it. A bleak storm came in, and it was a big storm. Like, I think several people in the region died, because of the intensity of this storm that came through. Yeah. And I had no shelter when that hit. But I did have a wool blanket, and I had plenty of firewood. As a matter of fact, there were these big root burls from the acacia trees because, we were on a reservoir. And on a reservoir, the shoreline goes up and down.
Yeah.
And it had gone up and killed a bunch of trees, right? And so then you've got, like, eroding out these giant root burls. And they're super dense, heavy hardwood, right? Acacia. And you could drop one of those root burls on a fire, and that thing would burn all night super hot, right?
Yeah.
And so when I saw those rain clouds coming, I just grabbed a few of those, right, and put them there. And so I had this like raging hot fire through that entire storm, which quickly dries you back out as soon as the rain stops. Wool, most of my clothing was wool, and wool blanket. So even though I got wet, absolutely wet, right? You stay fairly warm inside of wet wool, right? It tends to help you. It still retains some heat in that condition. So honestly, it wasn't that big of a deal for me, that storm. I got wet, yes, but I stayed warm and dried right back out easily and went on with the work I had to do. But I thought, man, that would have been really nice if I'd had a shelter. I would really love to just hang out in a shelter instead of enduring being wet and, standing up by a fire at night because the rain's pouring down so hard. So I thought, yeah, eventually I do want to build a shelter, but not until the time's right. And I noticed something like 50 yards from where I was sleeping, there was an ancient rock structure, like the foundation of it. Mm-hmm. Somebody had lived in that spot in a little stone house at some point in the past. And I would actually sit there in the mornings on the edge of that shelter. It's kind of like my little sitting spot. Because I could sit there and like scan the whole hillside, a big area, and like watch for game and, at first light. One morning I was sitting there at first light and I saw a mouse actually in the little ruin, right? And that's when I got the idea, I could trap mice for bait. Because here's another rule that we had out there is that we couldn't leave traps out overnight. So they did get approval for Paiute deadfall traps, but they couldn't be left out overnight, which like defeats the reason for a deadfall trap. That's how you use them, is leave them up overnight. So I had written that off. I wasn't planning to use any deadfall traps, but when I saw that mouse in the daylight, I thought, I can just get up early in the morning and set a bunch of traps. And so I started doing that. And I actually caught mice, caught a shrew, and they were very effective for bait. But that's another story. Back to the shelter. Anyway.
Yeah.
But sitting in that little ruin kind of inspired me to build a rock shelter. And I decided to build it exactly the same size. So my blueprint for my shelter was a replica of an existing ruin. Now, one of the rules, of course, is that you, of course, would never destroy or touch a ruin. So I didn't just go rebuild the existing one. I didn't steal any stone from that one either, but started fresh. And then on timing, at day 21, it's when you get your first doctor visit. And I think it was right after that, short time after that I started building that shelter. And at that point, I was feeling confident. I had caught several large catfish. On the show, they only have so much time, right? They're not going to show everything that happens. And there were quite a few fish that I caught that did not, make the edit. And so I had more food than you might think. Not that I didn't get hungry. I had some hungry patches for sure.
Yeah.
But I was feeling confident around the ability to continue bringing in that catfish. And I could fish while building the shelter. So I wasn't taking time away from building the shelter, or from fishing to build that shelter. So I could sit there and watch my hooks and line, or I could stack rock. And I would have spent far fewer calories sitting there watching, but I also don't like to sit around. Like, I'm not somebody that goes fishing and sits there and watch, in my regular life. I don't get a lot of pleasure out of sitting still. So it worked really well for me to have something to do while I was fishing. And I really loved replicating that old shelter. And my dad loved laying stone. As kids, all over the property here, there's stone walls everywhere. He loved building stone walls. So I learned from him how to stack stone. And of course, I, as you know, made a pretty big error in my stone laying there that had some pretty significant results.
So what went wrong? Because there was a spectacular moment. You looked like you were almost done, and then the whole thing comes crashing down on one corner.
Yeah. So, it was a dry stack wall, which is, well, first of all, the stone I was using, it was a type of shell, and it wasn't flat. It was convex, and so it was thicker in the middle than it was at the edges.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying the wall was thicker in the middle than it was at the edges?
No, the stone that I was using to build the shelter.
Ah, okay.
So it wasn't perfectly flat stone. So you had to stack it pretty carefully to get it to work. And so, I had two stone walls with sand fill in the middle, right? And the idea is that the wall kind of leans into itself as you go up, right? And that, those walls are all over the world. People live in homes built that way in every third world country I've ever been to. You just see that constantly. And so it's a well-known, technique that works. It's naturally insulated because you have that sand in the middle. The wind can't blow through it. It's a really great type of structure. But you got to stack the stone correctly. And one evening, I kind of run out of good quality stone that I'd hauled over to the location. And I was working on the wall and I was trying to use up the rest of the rock I had. And I built out this little section on that back corner. And I looked at it, I was like, I'll probably take that apart and redo it in the morning. I'll get some different rock. Well, I came back the next morning, hauled over a bunch of rock. And I looked at it, I thought, you know what, if I just put a big rock right over that, kind of cap it, I think that's going to be okay. And I just kept going up. And it was a tragic mistake. Like it would have only taken me 10 minutes to have redone that at that point, right? To just fix it and move on. But I was kind of in a hurry, I guess. I just wanted to get it done. I'm on camera. I'm trying to get this thing finished. And man, did I regret it. When that thing came down, oh, yeah. Terrible.
Did you feel like at that point then, because that's a bit of a test, right? Like a mental test. Did you consider giving up and not carrying on? Because my assumption was once it fell down like that, I was like, okay, he's not going to bother finishing this thing. It's like too many calories now. Yeah. What was your thought process?
Well, yeah, the first thought was when I saw that kind of like unzip, I was amazed at how that was like dominoes, the way that just continued to come apart, clear out to where the other solid corners kind of stopped it, right? Mm-hmm. And I was really worried about its stability. Like, can I even get this thing? Because you build it in layers, and then the layers were broken, right? And I thought, that's going to be hard to patch, like way harder than building it in the first place. And I had this fear that like, I'm going to be working on patching this and it's going to keep collapsing and it's just going to be a mess. I'm like, I'm going to be on camera now, just like trying to fix this and it's just going to go terrible. That's something you think about when you're out there, right? You're filming yourself 24 hours a day. You're not allowed to delete anything. So all the mistakes are there for the world, right? So all that's in your head. But after that fell down, I went back to camp, ate some lunch, at a big mill, and it's like, you know what, I can do it. I'm just gonna go back there and rebuild that. And I had it done by that night. I had that patched up, between lunch and dark. I had that back to where it was when it started to collapse. I just hustled and got after it, and then it was solid from there on out. One of the cool things I noticed when it fell down was that it only fell outwards. Not a single rock fell inside. When I filmed the inside, there were some rocks on the floor, but those were stones that I put there to build with. They hadn't fallen off the wall. Okay. Yeah. And that gave me some comfort. Like seeing that collapse like that, I was like, who would want to sleep next to a wall that could potentially fall on you, right? But I thought about it, and like the physics of that is it can't fall inward because it's a square, right? It can't fall in on itself. Rock can't compress. Mm-hmm. So if it's going to collapse, it would only collapse outward. So even though I'd seen it do that, I was comfortable with sleeping in it after that because I actually saw that nothing had happened on the inside.
Man, I didn't even think about that as a potential.
Right?
Would have just been like naively laying there. Oh, nothing's bad's going to happen tonight. No, that's a good point. It's good that you considered it. Thank you for sharing the info about that house because I was so curious. I was definitely... definitely heckling at the TV at some point because I guess there's a system in place, like a number of previous. There's 12 seasons now. Quite often, people really focus on building like a huge fortress, and then they either don't finish and they tap out, or they finish and then they kind of they just have their thoughts and then they get sad and then have to tap out. Usually a few days afterwards. So I'm glad that you had the calories to back it up. That's awesome. It was thing that wasn't quite as shown in the edit. So I'm curious then, you said you were happy with the amount of fish that you had. Do you mind sharing, do you know how much catfish you had kind of throughout that process? Like you were catching some big old catfish, that's for sure. So I was thinking wow, that in itself is a huge meal, just one of those. But you were drying it, were you?
Yeah. So the acacia trees you probably saw it was big thorns, right? And they're perfect drying racks. So I was filleting the catfish into really long strips. So you go down the fillet, and before you get to the end, you don't cut all the way through, and you come back, and you can zigzag through a fillet and make these really long strips of meat, and then just hang that on an acacia thorn. So you got this really long, and it dries out in that climate really quickly. And there was a little bit of a challenge with ants in the acacia trees. So every acacia tree has its own ant colony.
Yeah.
Because they love the sap, right? And they'll climb all over every inch of that tree. And so if you'd hang in an acacia tree, a few hours later, the ants would find it. But what I figured out is that right there along the edge of the reservoir, there was a high water mark, which water rarely gets to that high water mark, it looked like to me. But there were still some living trees below the high water mark, and those trees didn't have a resident ant colony.
Okay.
And so if I hung all of my meat in those trees that were below the high water line, no ants. So it was great. So, by the end, and they don't really show it in the edit, but you kind of see it in the blurry background when I'm sitting there with my son, that the trees behind us are just completely loaded with meat. They did show a few of the catfish I caught, but I caught several more large catfish. As a matter of fact, I think the biggest one I caught, they didn't even show it, but other than in the preview, in one of the previews for the episodes, they've got me carrying a fish on a stick. I've got it over my shoulder, and it's hanging down behind me, and just walking. That's the only glimpse of that biggest one that I caught. And that was early on, actually. So it's really easy to store the meat. And then when you boil it, it tasted just like fresh catfish because it reconstitute.
Yeah.
It was really, really delicious.
Perfect.
Yeah.
How long do you think that biggest fish was? I mean, I guess you said if it was carrying behind you, I mean, was it kind of the length of you, or how long do you think it was?
Yeah, it was over 4 foot long. So we did, they gave us a measuring stick before we went out. Or actually not a measuring stick. They marked our belts with centimeter increments because we were required to measure fish when we caught them. So every time we catch a fish, in your little nightly report that you would send in on your yellow brick, you would tell the number of fish and the length of each one.
I didn't know that. Okay, that's interesting. I guess then they didn't show that big fish very much at all. There's two things I want to ask you about. One, was there anything else that you really wish that they'd shown in the story overall that just, I mean, I know you've got to go through a lot of people, a lot of stories, something has to get cut. I know that they probably cut some things in order to make things seem a little closer perhaps than they were. I know that that's happened a few times in previous seasons as well. But was there anything that you really wish that they'd included?
Well, yes, but, I went into the show understanding that there's no way they would show everything. Yeah. They can't, first off. But then, and they're very upfront about this. Like when you're there for the 10-day orientation camp, they talk about the model for editing the show. Mm-hmm. Each episode has a theme, basically. And they say stories need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if you didn't film it well enough for us to use it, it didn't happen, right? What's that? What a dog out. So you go into that knowing that not everything that happens, is going to make the cut. And alone is a very real experience. You are out there absolutely by yourself. It's real. You're on your own. There's nothing going on behind the scenes, right? Yeah. So that part's really real, obviously. But when they do the edit, they are trying to create a narrative and a story. I mean, that is what the show is. It is not a play-by-play, everything you ate, everything you did, how many calories total. Like, they're not doing that. So, and I've heard this from other participants before I even went, not to have that expectation. And so I wasn't expecting that. So, that it is what it is. And it is, I'm super happy, with the way they told the story and, generally accurate with missing, of course, a lot of details and nuance, but.
Yeah.
No.
But there wasn't anything that you thought, oh, it would have been nice if like you were hoping that would have been included.
Yeah, so I had really good success with those Paiute deadfalls early in the morning. I caught a lot of mice. And so I really enjoyed going out and setting those up at like 4 a.m., you know, and then going making another round around 8 a.m. to check them all and harvesting those mice. That was really fun for me because our family has kind of a special connection to the Paiute deadfall trap. In this canyon, just up here about a mile or half mile, there's an overhang. And in the 1960s, it was excavated and they found bundles of these sticks. And they don't know what they were for. And my father actually figured it out, reinvented the Paiute deadfall trap. It was originally called the Olsen deadfall, but my dad didn't like that. And he said, no, we're going to call it the Paiute deadfall because it's the Paiutes that lived here that made it. And we're going to name it after them, not me. So that trap, you know, is kind of like a little family story around it. So I had a lot of success with it, and I thought that was really cool. But they only actually showed one success with trapping, and it wasn't even with the Paiute deadfall. I set a little figure 4 trap that I caught that elephant shrew with, which is a similar trap. But so that was a piece that I loved. I had a few run-ins with baboons that didn't make the cut. I did spend some time in a hunting blind. I did have, you know, some pretty close encounters and some fun things happened there. But again, I didn't ever take a shot, so there was no middle and end of a story. It was just me hanging out in the blind, seeing some things, you know.
Which is something I think we've all done if we've done some bow hunting in South Africa.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So what were your observations then? I wanted to ask you about that as well. Hunting over there, I mean, at least for me personally, I've not hunted everywhere in America, obviously, but pretty different experience. The game over there are just a different kind of thing, right? I mean, one, there's so many of them, but also the way they behave is pretty wild too, right? You must have had that steep learning curve must have happened for you as you were out there. What was the first animal that you encountered where you're like, okay, this is going to be tricky?
Yeah. So the second day I was there, I scouted my entire area. They give you what's called a yellow brick. It's a GPS tracker, and you can message on it, you can type on it, and it's got a safety device. It's where you have your button to tap out, right? If you push that button on that, they know it's an emergency, and they're going to come to where you are and rescue you or pull you or whatever. But if you get near what they call your geofence, like the edge of your area where you're allowed to be, they'll beep you with a message and say, hey, you're at the edge of the area, time to turn around. And my goal that second day was to bump all my borders. I wanted to know exactly where my area was. So I did. You know, of course, the lake was one border, but the other 3 to the, you know, all 3 other directions, I bumped that border. And I was also just doing a survey of like the game and
what's that?
And I couldn't believe how much game I saw that day.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Yeah. That area is fantastic. You know,
what did you see?
Wildebeest, sable. Unfortunately, I didn't have any warthogs in my area. Not even any sign of them because it's so rocky.
Yes.
You know, they live in holes. Dug by other animals, but there were just no holes for them to live in there because of the rocky soil. So that was unfortunate because that was one source of maybe a little bit more fat, you know, than the typical antelope species.
Yes, warthogs definitely tend to be a bit more fatty, and it's a shame you didn't get to experience them. I mean, I'm sure you must have seen them maybe in the pre-time
orientation camp. Yes. Yep.
Okay, they've got so much character, haven't they? They're just like such fun little creatures. Like they're like pigs, but they're like pigs here, but they have such personality. I guess there's a reason why Pumbaa was a warthog.
Right. Yeah, they're super fun to watch.
So then, did you try walking and stalking them at all, or you just thought blind is going to be the way to go with these animals? Like, what was the closest you got, do you think?
Walking and stalking, like a couple, I think there was a gemsbuck.
Yes.
That I came around a bush and it was, 20 yards. It was within shooting range, but it blew up immediately. Like we surprised each other. So
yes,
unfortunately I wasn't, I had an arrow knocked, but it had already exploded by the time so no opportunity there. But Yeah, blind with, ambushing them is definitely the way to go, especially with a traditional bow. I mean, they're so aware. Trying to sneak up on them, now and then you can be successful. But in a game like Alone, you need to have a pretty strong possibility of success. There's a lot on the line, right?
Yeah.
And so spot and stock wasn't really the best approach, I didn't think. On that first day when I bumped against my boundaries, I did find a location where two main game trails crossed.
Okay.
And there was the opportunity to set up a blind there, so I did at that crossing. And I could tell I got a lot of traffic. And so when I did stay in a blind, I stayed there. I had one experience in that blind where a big troop of baboons came in, and I could hear them coming for a long time before they got to me because they roll over rocks to look for food. So it's just rock rolling, and they're noisy and they're yelling at each other. And there's like babies screaming because they're getting in trouble, and getting swatted, and like we're just a noisy bunch. And I know you know about this.
Yeah.
So they're coming, and I'm like, oh wow, they're still coming straight to me. And I could hear hoofs clacking as well. I thought there's hoofed animals traveling with these baboons. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. But the baboons arrived first. And I was in the bottom of there's a blue bush tree and then a buffalo thorn tree. Yeah. And baboons love both buffalo thorn and blue bush, right? And so they came and they went into the trees above me, and we're up there chomping on these buffalo thorns. So it's like crunch, crunch, crunch. It's really loud. And I'm huddled down in the blind hoping that these hoofed animals are going to appear in my little shooting window. And a big male baboon walked right in front, and I passed on that. But then right then, I looked to my right, and there was like this little baby baboon, like little adolescent, quite small.
Yeah.
Popped into my blind and looked at me and then screamed, just like a little kid, just in terror screamed. And with that scream, every baboon just like lightning just like took off. They all responded to that one little youngster sounding an alarm. And the wildebeest, it turned out that were coming in with them, they all took off as well. And I thought, they're pretty smart following these monkeys around, or these baboons around, because they'll sound the alarm if there's any danger ahead of them. So I got busted by the baboons there on that.
Oh, experience. That's such a bummer.
Yeah.
It's often the case over there. I've found that many, many times. Is like lots of animals will go in groupings together. Everybody always hangs out with the ostriches because the ostriches, this is something I didn't know, but they have the largest eyes of any mammal. This I didn't know. It's like 2 inches across. So their eyesight is unbelievable. And they have a swivel periscope on their head like a giant turkey. Yeah. So they're very popular amongst other animals. And then obviously the giraffe always like to ruin everyone's fun. Not everyone's fun, sorry. My personal fun.
Fun fact on the ostriches and that season of Alone. We had a lot of rules, hunting regulations that we had to follow, right? Yes. Of course, all the local rules plus layers of rules that Alone added, plus rules from the landowners, So a lot of that orientation camp was understanding, the constraints we had. And so for different species, there were different limits on how many you could take, right?
Yes.
So for most of the larger species, there was a limit of one. We couldn't shoot zebras. We couldn't, there were like things we couldn't shoot. There were several species that were off limits.
Okay.
And then, if we killed, for example, like a water buck, our limit was filled on big game. You could only kill one big animal.
Wow. Okay.
And then they had like for medium game, I can't remember, it was 2 maybe. And then for the smaller game, there was like 5. So we had these limits on everything. And by the way, Kelsey's the only one that started to fill any of those limits that were high. But one of the things that was unlimited was ostriches. Like, you can kill as many of those as you want. Because they knew there wasn't any chance we were going to get any of them.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to the ranger when they announced that limit. He just laughed, because he's like, that's not happening.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like kind of, if you're walk and stalk bow hunting, if you take an ostrich, you are like the top of the top. No one, I don't know if anyone, I mean, like there's definitely a hierarchy. I think kudu is up there as one of the hardest animals to take walk and stalk. But an ostrich is just like, yeah, that's actually the punchline of the
They
joke.
like to stay in the open too, right? I'm just
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, they do. I mean, I've had emu come in and actually stalk me. So they're very different birds, but yeah, that's funny. Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that you had some good interactions with the animals. Oh, it must have been, did you regret them when you were in the hide that you didn't shoot that big male baboon, as
Yes.
that was the first thing there?
Yeah, it was like a 5-yard shot, like a sure thing, you know, but I was thinking, oh, there's hoofed animals, I should go for that. And
Yeah. Yeah, it's
yeah, it was
so
a big
hard,
mistake.
isn't it?
Like I should have, you know, in hindsight, I was definitely going to get busted by those baboons.
And you had a camera rolling and everything as well at the
Yeah.
time?
Well, so I had a camera on my bow,
Okay.
right? And I know I got good footage of that male, but then I had a camera on me. And after this episode, I looked at that camera and it had frozen up. And so it wasn't working. I had one camera they ended up replacing that was kind of faulty. I did that a
Okay.
few times and ended up swapping it out. But so that was a bummer. And that might
So
be part of the reason it didn't get cut, is the only footage I got was where my bow was pointing rather than
They didn't have footage of you.
right, because that
Yeah.
camera.
So then you can't see the story.
I had a full day of footage of me sitting in that spot, but when the baboons came in, that one camera decided to.
Play up. Yeah, that's the way it goes, right? It's always the way it goes. Okay, so how you said you walked the whole boundaries. Just out of curiosity, how big was the boundary? I don't know if that's something that alone
Yeah.
can say, but
You know, I think in neighborhood of 8 to 12 square miles, something around that size.
wow. Okay, that's pretty big then.
I've been meaning to actually get on Google Earth because I could look at Google Earth and know exactly what it was and then actually have it calculate the area. I should do that sometime.
Yeah, that was something me and my wife did because we were so perplexed when it was announced that it was the crew. And there was like, first of all, in my mind, I was like, okay, well, that's going to be tricky because I've never been anywhere in the crew where there's a significant amount of water other than a few like circular cement dams in farm areas.
Right.
So then when I saw that there was a large body of water and then a few kind of feeding rivers, that was when the adventure began, like the search began. I was like, I don't know where this is, but we need to find this out. My wife was actually like, I think she actually paused the show and was like, no, I have to know where this is right now. I can't. And I think it sounds like a lot of other people did the same thing as well, who were nerding out quite hard. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, so yeah, on that water situation, you know, we were on a reservoir. So it's the Orange River was dammed up, right?
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about surviving on the shore of a reservoir versus the shore of a lake, you know, there's a significant difference in that the water level for a reservoir will go up and down. You know, as they're bleeding it out during the irrigation season, the water level drops a lot. And then during the rainy season or whatever, it'll fill back up. That means that you don't have any kind of marsh or green zone because it can't survive because the water level keeps changing. And so it's just the straight Karoo Desert right to the water's edge. Yeah. Whereas if it had been like a natural lake that had a stable shoreline, you would have had marsh habitat, right? In certain places, you'd had a shoreline that would have had a green zone, right? And that would have introduced a whole set of new species of plant, right? That would have provided potential calories. So that was a pretty significant thing. I know that here in the Great Basin, you know, the most bountiful locations for the native populations here were the marsh areas. Like that's pretty well known among the archaeologists around here that those marshes were a significant food source for them because you get a lot of, you know, cattails, bulrush, you know, a lot of starch stored underground in those marshes.
Yes. Yeah.
And then just a lot of wildlife too that lives within that ecosystem. So.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to go on.
Well, you asked earlier why the season was short, and I think that was a factor. Like the conditions there, as far as like edible wild plants, it was pretty limited. And so unless you know, harvested fish, longevity wasn't really an option.
And then also coupled with the fact, like we said before, that it's a completely new terrain, completely new environment. And apart from yourself, where you luckily had a very similar kind of experience growing up, everyone else is not, they've been spending however many years training or thinking, or their whole life as well. A lot of people thinking that they're going to be in boreal forest, like you said. So definitely not that. That's for sure.
No.
I've got one little question I'm curious about, and it's a little family dynamic question that's just been tickling me. But first, I just want to plug in my laptop. I think it's about to die. I thought that I plugged it in, and that's on my list of things I should have done. So give me 1 second. Okay. Last question. I'm curious then, growing up in an environment where obviously your father fast became like an icon of wilderness skills and survival, and being in a large family of all people who are like put to work and having to apply themselves and learning these skills as you're growing up, did you feel like a desire to, first of all, obviously want to do a good job and like really impress your dad because he's kind of this respected person in the community that's become a big part of your life when you're growing up? And then was there much like competition between you and your siblings, like in trying to like outdo each other or be more, I don't know, connected with the wilderness? It's probably a dumb question, but I'm just curious.
Sure. Yeah. So I definitely felt the burden of representing, our family. Where it was my father's career, and it's considered, one of the great wilderness survival instructors, of all time. He's right up there with Mors Johansky, in his own region. Like Mors, the northern guy, my dad focused on this area and was well known for that. And so there is like this family reputation, and you do feel that responsibility. So that's a bit of a burden, honestly, more than a help. Like, because if you're afraid when you're out there, that's going to decrease your chances of success. Like if you're stressing out about whether or not you're going to succeed or how people are going to perceive you, that's only taking energy away from the game of finding food, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like you're trying to solve the puzzle of calories, and if you're instead thinking about what people are going to think, that's a real waste of time. So, I made a good effort to not let that influence me. Certainly before going out, though, like part of the anticipation or fear that you feel about going and doing something like that is that it is so public. Like you're signing up for something, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how well it's going to go. High chance of failure, and so having the courage to go out there, the higher the stakes are, I think the more courage you have to go. And one of the high stakes, I would say, for me was this feeling of responsibility to represent well. Right?
Yeah. That's such a good point. I didn't even think about it that way. Like if you've already through work of your siblings and of your family and of your father and your mother, like you've got this whole thing already. Why would you risk? Yeah, it's a risk, right? Like if you go out and do something very public, there's always a chance that it might undo some of that good that's happened already. So you're right. I think that's a very good point about you definitely have to have an amount of bravery in order to do that, a significant amount of bravery. And I'm glad you did, because I mean, you put out on a great show. So thanks for competing.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I think every contestant that's ever had the courage to go on alone, I really respect that. Whether they stayed 1 day or 100 days, just being willing to put yourself out there, go out there and struggle in front of the camera, in front of the world. And there are so many variables. Like you're a hunter, that every hunting trip you go on is not successful, right?
Yeah.
You can develop skills that definitely increase the likelihood of success. But at the end of the day, I don't think any of us go hunting with a guarantee that we're going to return, with game, because there are a lot of variables that have to come together. And so everyone going on alone takes that risk in a very public way. Yeah.
Yeah. Hats off to everyone who's competed, and hats off to you, Nathan. Yeah. Thank you so much for jumping on the show today. It was so good to pick your brains and hear your stories.
Oh, thank you.
Is there?
I want to hear more of your South African stories at some point.
Well, yeah, we could happily jump on a call at some point, and I can. I would love to exchange notes on some of the things that have happened. Although I've been lucky and I've had some success walk and stalk bow hunting in South Africa, I've had so much failure. But I guess you don't talk about, that's not the stuff that shows, is it? It's the results that I guess that people care about. Anyway, I am fully waffling now. I will stop taking any more of your time, Nathan. Thank you. And one quick question I wanted to ask you. Is there anywhere you'd like to send people? I know you don't have a huge presence, excuse me, on social media.
Honestly, no. I don't I don't have any social media or anything that I do. So yeah, I don't have any place to point people. If you are interested in wilderness therapy as an intervention, for you or anybody in your life, there are amazing programs out there. The members of OBH, the Outdoor Behavioral Health Care. If you just Google that, you'll find them. Anasazi Foundation is a member of that. They're one of the organizations that does, a fantastic job taking people out in the wilderness.
Fantastic. Thanks again, dude.
Thank you, Robin. That was a pleasure.
Okay, Nathan Olsen, thank you again so much for jumping on this podcast and sharing all of your wisdom with us today and your memories. Yeah, it was fantastic. Every bit as good as I dreamed it would be. So thank you for that. And thank you everyone who's still listening. It's fantastic that you're still here. It's a perfect moment for me to ask you to just give us a follow, set to auto downloads if you can, and share this with a friend. If you think someone else would enjoy the kind of things that we talked about today, alone and survival, mental health in the bush, all of those subjects, then sling it over and spread the word. The more people who know about the podcast, then it becomes easier for me to get amazing people on board like Nathan. One last thing I should actually say is we mentioned a bunch of things at the end, resources that you could check out if there's anything that you found interesting about this podcast. There's a bunch of helpful links down in the show notes. Check it out there. There's some extra material that you can digest when you have the time. That's everything from me for now. Thanks for listening, and until next time.
Welcome to the Wild Dispatch.